Let's continue with aspects of love, and the discussion's based on your book, Unconditional Love Is, Appreciating Aspects of Life. And amongst the many different aspects of love you write about in the book, there's one I'd particularly like to take up with you today, and that's the one on faith. And I'm interested in this particularly because for me faith has a kind of a spiritual context to it, and I know that you tread fairly lightly around or in the area of spirituality. And what I'd really like to do is to ask you to explain your understanding of how faith relates both to unconditional love and also to both spirituality and everyday life. I'm rather imagining that you're going to be talking about faith in one's everyday life, but let's look at that and go into it. And what I'm going to do first of all is to read the page that you've done about faith, just a short 3 paragraphs, and let's pick up some points that you're writing about here. So, to believe in ourselves is to have faith in life. Ever surrounding us is the constant good life affords as proof of the possibilities. Without faith in ourselves, we often have little faith in life. We must learn to trust in our ability to create the lives we dream of. When we seem to require it most, it is faith in our inner wisdom that carries us through. Having faith and trust in life at all times comes from knowing they are ever present and always available. Acknowledge your limitless potential and ability to rise above every situation through love. Faith, such a simple word with such enormous power. Unconditional love is faith. To love life unconditionally is to have faith in that same life. So, clearly you're talking about faith in oneself, faith in life. What would you like to say about that?
In my experience and understanding of faith, typically speaking, in many, and if not all, most cultures on the planet, especially then the religious cultures within cultures, there is a profound sense of what we would conceptually understand as faith. Our Western word being faith, and many different words in different cultures. The way that I wish to help express an understanding of faith, it truly can have a deep spiritual meaning, absolutely does have deep spiritual meaning, and yet the way we have evolved culturally, and particularly through religious traditions, it has often been that these natural forces, these natural activities that we would call life, become externalized. And so our faith is often interpreted as an external experience through some external power or force. And there are many, many different ways that people can look at that. There are people who will look at it in the notion of God, or some term that would represent the idea of a Godhead. And then, it goes to the other way, where people will be very nature-oriented, and they will see life forces in nature and consider that, an element of this sublime nature that is within all of us. Those are wonderful interpretations. The challenge I pose with that is that it tends to be very externalized and not necessarily contemplated from an internal standpoint. And of course, so much of what I've endeavored to do in my life and then share is how to make whatever we're experiencing in life a more tangible, real experience in the present moment. Faith being one of those terms that we use in our kind of everyday language is often used as a term, but not necessarily considered, not really considered, because we have a tendency to just kind of throw off the definition. We will say, like, we have faith in something. And almost always, and I'm talking in very general terms, very broad views now. I'm not talking about anybody's individual experience, but typically the idea of faith is something from something outside of people. And what I'm suggesting here is to make an experience more real and tangible for an individual is to bring that notion of what does faith mean to me, and start looking at it from our day-to-day experiences and start to realize how this natural force that we all understand is part of our experience, this idea of, where does our intuition come from? Where does the very animation of our life come from? I'm not here to actually put a definition on that. I'm not here to say this is what, the supernatural force is that is what connects to all of us, with perhaps the idea of the notion of love, because love seems to be the one constant in absolutely everything. To understand more of this notion of faith that we have typically kind of placed outside ourselves, faith in something, faith in someone, faith in some entity, some deity, something, really kind of separates us from the very energy that we're having faith in. And my hope is to have people simply begin to ask themselves the question, what does faith really mean to me? I mean, truly, really, not just I have been taught to have faith in something, but literally walk through each day and find our own faith in ourselves and our strength to have the courage to do the things we need to do or want to do or to imagine to do. And if we actually think about it in our practical everyday, we have essentially kind of a invisible faith in the very fact that we wake up in the morning. We have faith when we go to bed at night that we will wake up in the morning. Well, the same thing is that with each breath we take, we have faith that there's going to be another breath to follow. We have faith that each of our daily routines will lead us to where we think it will lead us to. So we actually already engage a tremendous amount of faith. Some of it's rote habituation. We have faith that when you go to reach for the toothbrush, we're going to be able to pick it up. But if we actually start to realize how this natural force animates us and allows us to have the experiences that we're having, now we're beginning to internalize a connection to this universal force. And again, it's not my desire to describe or limit or narrowly define what that force is to people, or whatever that nature is. What I'm hoping to convey through the idea of, say, in this particular quality of life, is let's contemplate what faith really means to us, and perhaps get beyond the definitions and traditions and rituals that we've been taught and the suggestions of others, and really define it for ourselves. Because what we'll find is that the more we can understand our nature, our true nature, our nature is love, the more strength and courage and faith in ourselves we will have to do things that we wouldn't normally do. And that's how we evolve, that's how we expand, that's how we grow, is by actually having faith in our own ability to accomplish something. And I think that's the key piece why this is such a critical quality or aspect of our life, is that if we don't have a sense of self-worth or a sense of self-esteem or a sense of self, literally the big S, we really don't then take on and imagine a better world. We tend to stay in a routine and a rut and very complacent and apathetic. Yet when we have faith in ourselves, we know we can rise above. And if we really think about it, and this is what I did very early on in life, is I thought about it. It's, nothing in life is really going to be thrown at me that I can't overcome in some way. There is nothing, even death, if rightly understood, is just a sense of peace with oneself, and the loss of another, well, life goes on. I mean, there are things that we tend to think that are usually culturally we would say crisis of faith. Well, a crisis of faith really probably can best be described as a separation from ourselves. Because when we trust ourselves and we trust this natural force that animates us, the love that we have to offer and to share, then we have a very different experience as we walk through life. So for me, it's, taking that very kind of nebulous, generic term that is used quite frequently in our cultural vocabulary and saying, let's make it tangible, let's really understand this, because if we really understand it, it expands the potential so greatly, and it makes faith a very practical part of our daily life.
So, are you saying that the universal force that we could have faith in is within, rather than
Right.
without?
The universal force is really us, because if we look at, our thoughts and feelings, as we've mentioned before in our discussions, our thoughts and feelings create our reality. Well, one can go back and say, well, where does the original thought come from? Where is that original impulse? I can likely equally say is like, where is that animating force, in us? I mean, we can very scientifically say our hearts beat, and that causes this to happen and that to happen, and breath and air and all these amazing pieces have to come together to animate our physical bodies so that we can move about in this world. Well, one can certainly delve into the deeper spiritual recognition and ask that question, who am I really? What is this force really? And again, it's not my desire to answer that for anyone, because I think it's an extraordinarily personal, intimate relationship with oneself, with whatever they are connected to. What I'm kind of suggesting is that, let's just say in this instance, let's call it a universal force, a universal intelligence, a universal wisdom, a universal love. All of those are great descriptions that still defy the very fact that this defies description. So that is something that animates all of us on this planet. So, a person who smiles here, smiles somewhere else, that's an animating force. And that's that universal connection that, for me, doesn't necessarily need a very specific, rigid, defined term to identify it. Because, in fact, if I define it by a term, I really limit its experience. And for me, in the discussion of unconditional love, I'm sharing things so that people can find more of an experience with all these qualities rather than a definition, because we're not trying to box it in and say this is what faith looks like. We're actually saying, let's look at this quality of life that we've boxed into a definition and actually begin to experience its richness, its fullness, its actual experience in our day-to-day life.
Well, it's one thing having faith in one's abilities that one has developed through life. But you're saying there that we have a greater potential that's really coming from that animating force within, from that universal force, and that by having faith in our connection to that force and being able to tap that greater potential within, we'd find ourselves able to enjoy life or be more able in life.
Well, in fact, when we see, and all of us know countless stories of experiences where people have overcome extraordinary adversity, things that we couldn't fathom that they would overcome, and yet there was a spark of life in them that simply said they wanted more. And those are the extraordinary, those are kind of the extreme cases where, someone who had absolutely seemingly no resources, no connections, no anything, find themselves becoming, say perhaps very educated, or they become, scientists, or they overcome extremes and show that anything's possible. And I think that notion that anything is possible relates so beautifully with this idea of unconditional love, especially unconditional love as an unlimited way of being, which relates to the faith in ourselves, because one can say, this animating universal force flows through us, in us, around us. It is also us. In other words, why would we separate ourselves and call this universal force as something unique, separate from ourselves? It is us. So really connecting to this energetic, this love, this awareness, this wisdom, this animating force, whatever term a person would like to, establish with it, it makes us more one with it, and therefore we are filled with the potential that this force offers. And so take it that next step, and that gives us a confidence in our own ability that, well, I may not know how to do this particular thing right now. Yet it doesn't matter what status of life, what position of life, what state, what class, what resources around me, if I initiate this desire to do something more for myself, the animating force will bring about the opportunities. I will bring about these opportunities. I will bring about the necessary resources, the awareness, the people, the trainings, whatever it is, it will all come to me because I desire to create from this level. And that's having faith in oneself. In other words, we're quieting the inner critic, which is probably the biggest counterpoint to faith. And oftentimes, in religious traditions, crisis in faith is really rightly understood. It's not a crisis in faith externally, is we don't trust ourselves. We don't believe in ourselves. We don't believe we can overcome. Whatever we think is before us is absolutely insurmountable. And perhaps the stories we've read over eons of time where people have surmounted the insurmountable, are just there to remind us when we have our own sense of lack of self-faith. And again, all of this is designed to help people understand their own faith with themselves, because we are the ones walking on our own particular journey. And although collective traditions, collective communities, collective religions, collective cultures all play powerful roles in our lives, the potential downside is that we can follow these rituals and traditions and cultures and literally never think about our own personal power. And by doing that, we are partaking of a collective power, and in a way giving away our own ability to create new, create fresh, create things that could overcome or help or assist or serve or heal or do a multitude of beautiful things that not only impact our own personal lives but impact the lives of many others. There's a real I would say danger, but a definite challenge when we get into a collective and we just simply pass off our personal power through conceptualized ideas like an externalized version of faith. One can still have all the faith in the world and be completely aligned with their religious tradition, absolutely. And yet think of how much more powerful it would be to actually have faith in oneself while being in that religious tradition, rather than giving away our faith to some externalized notion or definition. To me, we can still be in all the places we are, but when we can actually connect with our own inner selves, we become much greater potent forces of love. Because if we are connected with ourselves, we're going to have greater love. And if we have greater love, we're going to share greater love. And if we share greater love, we're going to experience greater love. It's only when we are disconnected from ourselves and disconnected from our own love, disconnected from our own potential, that we create experiences and have experiences that are fearful because we doubt ourselves. So faith is a very, very, in our modern day world, it's a very potentially contentious term that we use because a lot of people are very attached to being externalized to this idea of faith, and most have an internal crisis of faith and don't necessarily take the time to contemplate and address what it really means for them.
And you're saying that that potential we have, that animating force we have within, is synonymous with unconditional love.
I say that, yes, that would be my experience, that when one taps into this limitless energetic flow that is just so sublime, then that experience is more of oneness, more of unity, and the feeling is greater love, greater and greater expanding love. And I guess the only way you can really describe it is the contrast that we often recognize so quickly here in our day-to-day lives is the experience of fear. When we're disconnected from that love, the experience is fear, which is the lack of love. And yet, in the same moment that we experience fear, we have the opportunity to take a deep breath and reconnect ourselves to love, because the love never disappears. The fear is only in the moment, but the love is eternally within us. So one can say that that eternal love within us that we can always tap into, if we but choose to, that becomes synonymous to this universal force, because we do find, like, step back in a very large picture, galaxies upon galaxies spinning around, suns upon suns, to the billions and to the trillions. There has to be some truly wisdom force guiding all that, lest there would be total chaos. Everything would be crashing into each other. Well, all we need to do is look at our own physical bodies, take that grand view and that brilliant wisdom, that universal force that keeps everything in a flow. Look at our own day-to-day bodies. We don't think about taking a breath. We don't think about making our heart beat. We don't think about having our trillions of cells do infinite numbers of chemical changes second by second. In fact, not only do they make changes, but they're dying off day by day and replenishing themselves. We don't think about any of those things. So there has to be an innate wisdom that literally animates our body, literally takes care of our body for us. Call it a scientific force, a physical force, whatever you would like to. It really does. Again, I strive to get people to kind of set aside their absolute definitions, because when we can set aside an absolute definition, we begin to see a bigger picture. And that's when this animating force, this universal wisdom, this unconditional love, which is us, begins to become more obvious.
So the more faith we have in that animating force, the more we'll express unconditional love in our life.
Yes, and to personalize it, let us say the more faith we have in ourselves, the more faith we will have in the animating force, which is us. Right. The more faith we will have in our ability to love, which is us. The more faith we will have in our ability to imagine new potentials, which is us. So, I'm taking something that has been relegated to a very specific part of our culture that we call religion, and I'm personalizing it, and I'm simply saying, we're not tossing out religion, we're simply saying, what do these terms mean for us? Let me think of this in comparison to what I've been taught, what's been suggested, what's been told. Let me think for myself, and then whatever one concludes, go forth, and have the experience. But let's take a moment to step aside and let's really address this, and how does this become very practical for my life? Because my activity has always been about making it practical so that we can understand it, so that we can actually experience it in our lives. And when we have a sense of self, we don't really even use the word faith anymore, because at that point we have a sense of self. And in that case, let us say that a sense of self is synonymous with faith, which is synonymous with this universal principle, which is synonymous with unconditional love.
Right. Okay. All right. Thanks very much, Harold. Appreciate that.
Pleasure.
Thank you.